All right, Chelsea fans, welcome back to another episode. That's right, of the London is Blue podcast. Hopefully your favorite Chelsea podcast out there and a part of the Men in Blazers Media Network. Dan, one of your hosts here. Nick as well, and our good friend Ben Jacobs. We are recording the evening after Chelsea lost in uncharacteristic fashion in Philadelphia, 3-1 to Flamengo. Not the game that anybody was hoping for on a very, I was going to say warm day. You were saying it was quite wonderful, Nick, on the temperature for it. But boy, oh boy, hot days for Chelsea Football Club right now.
All I'm saying is it's not nearly as bad out there as it could have been. Summer, there's a heat wave coming. It was sunny, but it wasn't like 110 degrees like it could have been. So I think we got very fortunate. But there was only one hot team out there, and it was not Chelsea.
Well, Ben, it was at least a little bit cooler in the press box?
Somewhat, although I was actually outside near the Flamengo fans who were fantastic. So pretty hot. And as you've just said, Chelsea pretty cold.
And I do think we should just start off like we were sat near the Flamengo fans, like right on the edge of kind of where their block was. They are fantastic. They created all the atmosphere in the stadium that we could see and hear because we were right in the middle of it. And they were deserved winners on the day. I think you just got to tip your cap to Felipe Luis and co. I mean, I know he was extraordinarily kind to Chelsea after the game, Ben, but this was not necessarily reflective of what happened on the pitch, I think.
Yeah, I think the more reflective summary of the game came via Flamengo's socials, which you can check out for yourselves, and they were quite savage towards Chelsea. And the reality was Enzo Maresca tinkered with his system. There were some selection question marks, but it was still a strong 11. Then you take the lead in the game. It was an error on their part on the halfway line, but from there, blistering run by Neto, who was probably Chelsea's brightest spark. From there, you think even if Flamengo, as they did, dominate a bit of the ball, they're midway through their season as well, and I think there was definitely a difference in the sharpness of both teams. Chelsea looked like they'd had this long old season, whereas Flamengo kind of like peak level, really up for it, all of the fans on their side. But when you're Chelsea and you're 1-0 up in any game, you feel like you can soak up that pressure. We saw it with Levi Colwill just before half-time, clearing off the line. Mm-hmm. And always an opportunity to then sucker punch again, counter-attack, 2-0, game over. But instead, they start the second half quite brightly for 5 or 6 minutes, and then suddenly in a 6-minute period, let in 2 goals. Jackson sent off 4 minutes after coming off the bench, and from there it was always going to be game over. And the only kind of saving grace is the fact that Tunis only scored 1 in their victory over LAFC, so a draw for Chelsea will still take them through, but crucially, they can't now win the group, and that means that they might, people may know by the time they listen to this, because the game is going on late this evening, they might have Bayern Munich in the round of 16.
Well, it definitely does not sound like the most advantageous position for Chelsea Football Club to be in as we think about the Club World Cup here. I do want to kind of go through the lineup that Enzo Maresca put out first in this match. We did mention, Ben, a couple of the changes and the tinkering that went on. I know, Nick, when we were looking at it as we were taking the train to the game, it was Rob Sanchez between the sticks, Cucurella, Colwill, Trev Chalobah, Malagusto. Then you saw Reece James go into midfield, Moises Caicedo, Enzo Fernandez, and then a front three of Liam Delap, Pedro Neto on the left wing. We got a chance to see him in that first half. He was a really fun watch live at this moment. And then Cole Palmer on the right-hand side, which we had talked about in our live pod last night. Would we potentially see that? And it actually ended up happening.
Yeah, it was an interesting formation. I would love to see the pass map for it, because I think it was really... we got these pass maps under Pochettino where the team was really kind of shifted and kind of oblong in the way that they set up. And it kind of felt like that watching it from the sideline. This time we were only a couple rows up, so we could kind of see where the main outlets were. And we were really struggling to get the ball down the right for a lot of the game. And I think that was Cole Palmer trying to figure out where the space was in behind and the overlaps, underlaps. Like, Pedro Neto was clearly the target man on the left-hand side, and there was some interesting movement between him and Cucurella on that side that I started to like. But it was, I'd suggest that the map was tilted towards the left-hand side pretty heavily, Ben.
Yeah, I think that's true. And it was a strange lineup because there was this conundrum at the beginning between where was Reece James and Malo Gusto going to play. James goes into midfield. You think it's a strong 11. You're trying to make a statement. You win that game. You would have won the group as it turned out. So Enzo Maresca's sticking to this idea that Reece James is a midfielder, which, whether true or not, becomes problematic because Reece James' peak right back, fit, gets into any Chelsea team. Whoever may come in, whoever may come through. Reece James, central midfielder, up against Lavia, Caicedo, Enzo, Asugu, Santos, if he's going to go a bit deeper than he did at Strasbourg. And it just doesn't seem to be working. And when Enzo Maresca flagged the midfield, I think he referenced a lone game where Reece James scored a wonder goal, I believe it was against Wigan. And that's what he's capable of. But in the midfield position where James is being used now, he's not actually getting forwards. So it's one thing sort of saying midfield, it maybe is a bit less of a burden than being an overlapping fullback. He doesn't seemingly look that comfortable yet inverting. But if you're going to play him in midfield, he has to push forwards and have output, but he can't in that role. So that for me is a kind of an experiment that may run on into the season, but it needs to be consistent. And therein is the irony that if you're chopping and changing on midfield, or if James can't play back-to-back games, he's never going to get going there. Whereas you put him at right back, he's always going to get going. So that for me was a bit of a surprise. And then on a more positive note, even though we didn't see this formation, Enzo Maresca was asked in the build-up, could you play Jackson and Delap together? And I actually think if you looked at the movement off the ball today, you saw a lot of occasions where others moved into that central area and Delap went out wide. And what actually happened was that Pedro Neto would get in the box, not as much of a target, and Delap had nobody to aim at. There's actually a logic. Palmer in the centre, move over Neto to the right, which is his preferred side. And then if you want to in game management, Nicholas Jackson could have been the one on the left. Because when Delap moves out, he'll always have freedom to get in the box. And then you've got two target men and vice versa. It could be Jackson on the left, who's a decent crosser, and Delap. So there is a way, I think, in this system of it being fluid enough to accommodate some of these players. But for me, there's still a big question mark about the effectiveness of Reece James in central midfield.
So when because as we think about like all of these elements here, none of that I think happens in isolation. And you mentioned the Nico Jackson element as well. I think this was, another game that had a shocking moment for Nico in a very short run of fixtures that he has had a chance to play. I know that he did kind of go to social media to apologize after the game to fans for what happened. We saw players like Moises Caicedo in the mix zone talking about the team rallying behind him. Enzo Maresca in the press conference that you were at afterwards, talked about this kind of not necessarily being the defining element of his career in the future. I do think though, with Liam Delap coming in, it does have a lot of like questions around like where will his kind of future end up going?
Yeah, I think Chelsea are billing big faith in Nicholas Jackson, and I think that's true in terms of his potential, but he has to stay on the field. And even when he's on the field, discipline at times can be a problem. And I think there has to be a continued private conversation making sure that Jackson finds that maturity. And it is very easy to say Newcastle and Flamengo, 2 red cards. But for me, it's also the 8 yellow cards and the times where he maybe needlessly gets a booking. And the only way that Nicholas Jackson is going to fight with Delap and potentially start big games ahead of him is if that discipline and that maturity are addressed. Because if you just look at the numbers, he's still got in double figures last season. He scored more than Drogba in his first season. You can understand why Chelsea still think they've got something there. But if he is missing big games and costing Chelsea points in big games, then that's a different story. And I think Enzo Maresca, and I don't know what you guys thought because you were lower down and right there, so I'd love to know your opinion too, but Enzo Maresca said immediately afterwards to DAZN, it was a red card. Then he came in the press conference and said the Newcastle one was, quote, 100% red card, and this one wasn't quite that. And I actually think this one might have been worse.
It's worse. It's way worse.
The Newcastle one.
It's a dangerous tackle. You look at where his studs are placed. It's an absurd tackle. He was never getting the ball, ever. I mean, I know he's quick and he has long legs and he can sometimes make a challenge that you're like, maybe he can get there. This was not that. This looked like a guy who came on was frustrated because he got fouled once and looked for a little bit of retribution. And he got a lot of retribution instead. And I was sat there in the Flamengo, kind of right on the edge of the Flamengo section wearing my Nicholas Jackson shirt going, what the hell,
This is
man?
really all Nick's fault is what we found out.
On his birthday, by the way.
No, I mean, what the hell, man? Like, I thought the Newcastle one, like, it put him on the edge of, like, are you gonna be with us or are you gonna do your own thing? This, to me, like, 2.5 matches later, what are we doing? Like, I have Chelsea red cards all time in front of me with the amount of matches played. John Terry had 6, 492 matches played, though, 41,000 minutes. Okay. Frank LeBeouf, 5. Dennis Wise, only 4, surprisingly.
Wow, that's actually, I thought
Huge surprise.
Reece James, 3. Right?
Wow.
Yeah, he's actually had his fair share, too. Played a lot more than Nicholas Jackson. Fernando Torres had 3. Frank Lampard had 3. Sinclair Gallagher had 2. Fabregas had 2. Fabregas, one of the ones was hitting the referee at the ball, though. That was absolutely fantastic. And then you have some goalkeepers, of course, who, get in tricky situations who have 2. Nicholas Jackson has 2 in a very short amount of time, through yellow cards on top of it. Nicholas Jackson is someone that I like as a player tremendously. I feel like I've stuck up a fair amount for. I'm pretty pissed off right now, Ben. Like, and I think a lot of supporters are like, what are you doing?
Well, I think also it's very easy to say 2 in that space of time, but it was 0 up until Newcastle. So the problem is that he's basically, if you discount the Europa Conference League final, played 35 minutes or so against Newcastle in a massive game at a time where people said if Chelsea lost that, they might not get Champions League football. Luckily, that wasn't the case, but that's 35 minutes and 4 minutes. So the 2 red cards have actually come in 2 different competitions in the space of 39 minutes if you discount the Europa Conference League final. He's already suspended for the opening Premier League game. At the time we're recording, we don't know what this punishment will be. It's a 1-game automatic, but the disciplinary commission can upgrade it, and they might, because it was reckless. And I think it's that old saying for me of when you make one mistake, you either learn from it or more fool you because you make the same mistake again. And if you're Enzo Maresca and you had hair, you'd be pulling that hair out because you've just told him after Newcastle that you cannot do that. The energy, and I'm sure it comes from a really good place where he's trying to fight, he's trying to make an impact. He's just come off the bench, he's saying, okay, I'm fired up. He's playing against Newcastle, he wants to win a challenge in the ball, but he's not pausing and thinking what's at stake.
Yeah.
And again, look, this may not matter in the context of this, and it hasn't mattered in the context of Champions League football, but if you think about the 2 incidents, if that Newcastle loss and Jackson had cost them Champions League football, 100 million. If they lose to Tunis and go out of the Club World Cup, because they've got 35 million euros and 2 million a win or whatever, there's another 80 million euros on the table that then Chelsea can't get, and maybe that red card contributed to it. I know they were 2-1 down at the time, but I think that's the frustration, that he's done the same thing twice in the space of those 39 minutes. And now they'll have to tell him a 3rd time, and you start to lose a little bit of confidence if the player can't change their demeanour.
Do you think this impacts what Chelsea do with him this summer? Like, just straight up, like, we're going to put our cards on the table. Is this a thing where Chelsea are like, I don't know. I mean, I know they have to come out and say after the game, like, oh, we support him, he didn't mean it, blah, blah, blah. Like, because they don't want to drop his sale value. They want to put out a positive front that he's a really great player and he's just made a couple of dumb errors, which could very well be the case, to be fair.
Yeah, I want to say no because, first of all, we asked Enzo Maresca and he said no, so we'll take the manager at his word. But also within Chelsea, there is this backing for Nicholas Jackson. And the whole point of Delap, the number 1 target, is you don't then duplicate the profile, which is why, for example, for now anyway, they've ruled out Benjamin Sesko, and suddenly they're giving due consideration to a João Pedro or a Mohamed Kudus, who are not really Nicholas Jackson-type players. So I think the likelihood is Mark Guiu goes out on loan. We know Ipswich are interested. There's other championship sides. You then say Jackson and Delap are useful because there's a similarity, but one can go wide left, one can go wide right. They can complement each other. So then you look for that Nkunku type profile with the expectation that he'll go. I don't think one, or if you count Newcastle, 2 red cards will change Chelsea's perspective on the fact that they think this team with Jackson is better than without it. And actually, even though it's a very backhanded compliment, Maresca, when Jackson was out, injured, fine, that is just a compliment, and suspended, less good, but Chelsea still exposed. Both times, he said, without Jackson, we're a completely different team. So he remains valued, and if they were to think about replacing him, they'd be going back to profiles that before this red card, they've seemingly discounted. So I think he'll stay. It's not necessarily at this stage because we're hours after a red card. So it's not like you really would source these things in the hours after. It's his birthday. He's apologised. The dust would obviously have to settle if they were to change their opinion. But certainly before the Flamengo game, the notion they were going to go and sign a Ekitike or a Gyökeres, and that would mean that Jackson would be forced out of the club, that was strongly downplayed by people that I was speaking to.
We kind of talked about a couple of things with Nico. We've mentioned a little bit about the Reece James situation. Last kind of player-related item I wanted to talk about with the game is when Reece does get pushed forward into midfield, it means Malo Gusto plays. I think Malo Gusto's had less great performances over recent memory. And then that does create a situation where if Reece is being viewed as a midfielder, we now have both Marc Cucurella and Malo Gusto without really kind of any type of backups in an area where you would either want one backup for Marc Cucurella and you would want either competition or an upgrade for Malo Gusto. Like it's a very interesting kind of knock-on effect, Ben, in terms of what happens then with the fullbacks based upon this, and where maybe Chelsea, if Reece James is playing right back, you don't think you need to go upgrade, but if Malo Gusto is playing right back, you feel like you might need to go out and upgrade.
Yeah, and I think they've always had players, haven't they, that are centre-backs that can move into that right-back position, and we've seen that with one or two in the past. The left side's really interesting because I genuinely think that when Renato Vega signed, the expectation was that he's your Swiss Army knife. And then because you can move Colwell if you want physicality at left-back, Reece James was trialled at left-back, Gullit Stowe can go left-back, Cucurella. So there is actually a lot of options, but not every one of them is a left-back first, but they can play there. And that's why I think there was no kind of alarm about going out in the market. But now I actually think if they are to add a centre-back, they may well go for that left-sided centre-back who can also play left-back, which is where the links with Jorel Hato come from. I think on the right side, you still have that Caicedo ability. And I know that most Chelsea fans would say he absolutely has to go in midfield. And are we ever going to see an irony of all ironies where one game Reece James is picked in midfield and Moises Caicedo is played at right back? You never know. I mean, he surprised us all when he moved Reece James over to the left-hand side last season. But I think they know they've got that depth and versatility. And I think if they are to add, it will still be a centre-back predominant. But in light of Vega and the fact that he may leave, or that he only wants to play centre-back with a view to his international chances, if they are to strengthen in defence, which is not as high a priority as the left winger, but is still there on their list, then I don't know whether we'll go full-back first. I think it will be more centre-back, left-back as number one. Centre-back, right-back might be a priority, but as I've just explained, there's a few moving parts there. Chalobah can also go and play right-back if he needs to, but he might leave. Reece James's fitness is a question too. But there's not that many out there on the right centre-back, right-back of profiles that they seem to like compared to the left centre-back, left-back, which is where a profile like Hato comes in.
I guess first question, doesn't this strike you as all just being a bit too cute from Maresca? Like, play your right back at right back, play your midfielders in midfield, and develop a system that works. Two, there is no like for like out there for Cucurella right now within the squad or outside of the squad that I've regularly seen. Cucurella's impact up the field at I think the last half of the season noted, obviously some big goals, but more, I mean, he was playing like a wing back, stroke left back for a lot of that time. He was getting into number 10 positions. He was crashing the back post. Surely the center back, the left-sided center back, left back option doesn't fulfill that responsibility. So if they do buy that person and Cucurella isn't playing, and frankly, he's going to need some rest here. Like, I don't understand how it's possible that he's going to play all summer, be with the national team, do this, and then start the season, just be ready to go. Aren't you kind of leaving yourself a bit short, or is Maresca then going to have to change the whole setup again to match where the talent is? It just strikes me as a little bit odd.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think there is just this element of Chelsea Football Club should not have to tinker, a bit like under Ranieri, constantly to try and out-tactician opponents. Chelsea Football Club, with players in their number one position, even if that formation is predictable, they're going to have the ball, they're going to have speed, they're going to have intelligence, and they're going to be able to score goals. So there's absolutely a logic that says pick a predictable and consistent 11. You don't need these constant tweaks. And some of that comes from the Pep Guardiola school of surprising opponents. But ultimately, if you think about Chelsea, you pick your number one goalkeeper. Reece James is your best right back and should be overlapping, fitness pending. Cucurella is your best inverted left back, and by a mile. And there is a logic, if you're defining Malo Gusto as right back cover, that you may bring in one more or just have the opportunity to move Colwell across. Colwell and Fofana is the best pairing when they're fit. And guys like Tosin in particular, and Chalobah, who's been excellent, there's loads of depth there. And if they sell Chalobah and don't get an upgrade in the same position, then people are going to start questioning that, as they did when he went on loan and came back and went straight into the starting 11. If James is your right back, you immediately say it's probably Caicedo and Lavia. I know that's bad news for Enzo Fernandez. You could play him centrally and Cole Palmer on the right, but I think more likely you pick Palmer. Enzo Fernandez gets less games, but Romeo Lavia may not be able to go through an entire season. Sure. So Enzo Fernandez
may not be able to.
We don't know. I mean, because people will say that about certain names, yes, and then out of nowhere, a player could just play 38 straight games. But I think, yeah, there is a question mark over Lavia.
The probabilities are low that he would go from playing, 13% of his available Chelsea games to playing all 38 Premier League games.
Yeah, you'd manage the load, I think, and that is a fair point. And then obviously there's this whole conundrum as to, is Andrey Santos more advanced, so Palmer's back up, and does that mean Esteval is a right-sided player, or is Esteval Palmer's back up? Where does Santos fit in? Does he go deeper? But there's a lot of competition there. But either way, those are good options to have. You've got to work out how best to play Pedro Neto. And luckily for Chelsea, when he's on the left, he's still very effective. But if they're going to bring in a box office right-footed left winger, then presumably Pedro Neto moves to the right-hand side and competes with Noni Madueke, and then Jackson competes with Liam Delap. But they want to bring in one more attacker. And obviously, if you sign Mohamed Kudus, then he plays behind the striker, and that's Cole Palmer, that's Esteval, that's Andrey Santos, that's Enzo Fernandez in an 8. So they seem a bit overstocked there, but there's so much at stake and so many games in Champions League, and they need that goals output. I think Maresca summed it up as, of course you want one striker to score 40 goals, but he said, I prefer the idea of relying on 4 or 5 to get 10 plus goals to get to the same total. And this is why I think they still think there's room for more offensive output. But when you line them up like that, the formation's clear, the back line is clear, the midfield is obvious, but there's a debate over which ones get in. The wide players can switch sides. Delap presumably has been told he's going to get a lot of game time. Otherwise, I don't think he would have joined when he had the option of Manchester United. But instead, we're sort of seeing Reece James sometimes go from right to left and into midfield. We're seeing Malo Gusto switch around. We're seeing Cucurella invert, not invert, play in a more advanced role. We're seeing Delap go out wide. We're seeing Neto switch sides. We're seeing Palmer, who's got the 10, not play as a 10 and move out to the right-hand side. And I'm no manager, so I don't want to be overcritical about Enzo Maresca, because he may be able to explain why, and he is the authority and I'm not. But certainly when you look at it from the top of the stand, you just wonder why every single player, if fit, is not in their preferred position, because you can put them all into a neat formation. And if we see that for 5 straight games, 5 straight selections, 5 predictable formations, 5 fits, even if you can see it coming a mile off, you feel like Chelsea Football Club have just got the quality to win game after game after game. Then you build momentum, and then who knows where the season will go.
So, Chelsea have at minimum 1 more game left in the Club World Cup. They could potentially have 2 more. Obviously, again, we were recording this before we know if Bayern Munich would be the team that they would face in the next round, which does feel like a bit of a buzzsaw to walk into for Chelsea, given the way that they've been playing in this competition. One thing, just kind of maybe a lightning round on a couple things here, Ben. The Andrey Santos situation, I know Enzo Maresca mentioned it as part of the post-match press conference questions that he had answered about like him and Isugo getting chances in the future. Do you think in the next 2 games, yes or no, do we see Andrey Santos for more than 10 minutes?
No, but if they'd have won the game against Flamengo, then yes.
Okay.
And obviously there's integration needed, so there may be an element of needing to actually have him bed in and acclimatise. But what I would say is that we're going to start hearing a lot of noise, I think, from the Andrey Santos camp if he's not getting the minutes. So Chelsea's position is clear, and we have to respect that, that right now they're not looking to sell, they're not looking to loan. But whereas Isugo has come in with this Caicedo backup, fine, and I think he accepts that and will grow, and Mugu is obviously expected to go to Strasbourg and not with us in America. I think Santos is not seeing himself as the number 2 in his head to anyone. He's seeing himself as someone that, if he gets a chance, can stay in the side. So we're going to have to understand when he gets that chance. And if Chelsea's Club World Cup is cut short, then does that actually mean they put a few more pre-season friendlies in and he gets more minutes and it sort of pacifies the situation? But is there a scenario where he leaves the Club World Cup, has barely played any minutes, and feels a little bit doubtful of his Chelsea pathway? And that's probably the only nagging doubt from the player side. Right. Obviously, Chelsea have got all the cards. They may say, no, we want to keep him. We want him to be patient. But I think Santos definitely feels, after the season he had at Strasbourg, that he is ready for Chelsea minutes. And I'm not so sure, I don't know whether you agree, that in a game where they have to beat Tunis, Andrey Santos is going to get a look in.
I mean, it's pretty obvious he won't. I mean, I don't see a world in which Enzo Maresca, despite all the ridiculous and very poor tinkering that happened today, that he would play him. I mean, I think the great irony of today's match is that I think Andrey Santos would have been really effective in midfield and probably would have been the option to come in over Lavia for me, because he does have that forward look and can pivot really quickly, and the press from Flamengo actually stayed up longer than I thought it would. I thought they would kind of burn out in the second half, and they really didn't. But no, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious, and it would not shock me if Chelsea goes shopping him around. I think there's always been a lingering doubt about that, and whether they say it or not, like, there's clear links out there. So I think the cynic in me is feeling pretty doubtful about it right now.
I think we're always trying to figure out how to get a maximum number of minutes for great players and talented players, and it's always going to be the challenge at a team like Chelsea, where as you're promoting people, as you're bringing in some of the best of the best in their position, or people that you think can become the best of the best in their position, there's only so many minutes that exist to feed the people and to feed the players, and it can become very, very challenging. A couple more quick lightning round ones, Ben, because we will be talking a bunch again over the rest of the summer here. Just on your kind of thought, Chelsea sign X more players between now and the start of the Premier League season, which is less than 2 months away at time of recording. 1, 2, 3? 2 or 3. I think the goalkeeper situation doesn't appear they're going to revisit Mike Maignan. Robert Sanchez has been okay from what we've seen so far. I don't think he was particularly culpable for any of the Flamengo goals. So goalkeeper was more opportunism. If another one doesn't arise, then they'll do what they always plan, which is try and pick their number one from within. But naturally, Jordi Petrovic looks like he's going to depart. As I've broken before, there was always this kind of verbal clause or gentleman's agreement that he could leave for 30 million euros. It's not a bad price for somebody of his age and potential. So goalkeeper's got a question mark over it, but I don't think they're sort of desperately knocking on Milan's door at this stage. Price may drop later in the window. Goalkeeper may still be pushing for a move. Definitely that right-footed left winger, and we know they're prioritising Jamie Gittins.
absolutely another attacker with a view to Nkunku departing. And then I think they'll feel okay. Now, naturally, if they lose other players in terms of a high volume of outgoings and then later in the window they suddenly see an opportunity, if they realise due to a club's PSR position somebody that they thought wasn't available becomes available, and that's kind of the Morgan Rogers thing, then a maybe. But I think the kind of Kudos, Pedro, if we want to add him, Rogers, they all fall into this kind of versatile behind the striker, whether central or wide, and that is all kind of your Nkunku hole, even though Esteval fills the Nkunku hole. Santos might fill the Nkunku hole as well, but that's kind of how I read it, that these are not two from those names, and then it was always one from Gittins, Garnacho, and naturally Nico Williams at one point, but it looks like he might go to Barcelona now, and certainly Chelsea are not hot on that. The left side is interesting because we were always led to believe that they were looking for one more because of the Mudryk situation, and we now know he's charged, but they've lost Mudryk and Sancho. So is it still one? Yes, I think. I'd be surprised if they did two. Never say never, but remember Quenda's coming on that left-hand side in a year's time, and that's why I think it'll only be one. So yeah, I would say one more attacker, a versatile defender, and then a question mark over the goalkeeper. So I'm going to go with two.
Okay. Nick, what do you think? What's your number? Put it on the record now.
4.
Wow. Okay.
What positions, other than the ones I said?
I think they will go back for goalkeeper. I do think that Sanchez was culpable for at least one of the goals today, if not two. And I do think like so if I go goalkeeper, left defender, whatever the hell that is going to be, and then I go left wing, and then I go that inside forward type, I think that's your 4.
Wow. Okay, somewhere between 2 and 4.
Yeah, I might upgrade to 3 because I do think the Hatto type position could happen. So yeah, defensive reinforcement, right foot, left winger, and very possibly another attacker.
Well, listeners and viewers will have to let us know on the comments what they think the number of players are that Chelsea will be getting as of the 21st of June, because that's when we'll release this episode of the podcast. But plenty of decisions for Chelsea Football Club to make over the coming weeks, Nick.
Of course, and if you haven't heard our special from Philly,
it's not published yet.
Yeah, our boy Jake was working on the audio. As you guys know, we had a ton of like in-house audio issues for the recording, live recording.
They don't know that if we release this one first.
Right. Well, I'm just saying, if you never hear
Spoiler
that episode,
alert.
if you never hear that episode, that's why. If you do hear it and it's a little off from what you're used to from a quality standards perspective, that's why. We worked through it, and Naz and Liam were great, fun to be around for that one, but just note that if it's not the same exact thing that you're used to, that's why.
Well, that is going to do it for this episode because we have a dinner reservation that we're going to head off to. And unlike Chelsea Football Club, we're going to arrive in the box in time to get that one across the line. But thank you so much to our friend Ben. Great to obviously record with Nick as always. But until next time, Chelsea fans, you know what to do. Keep blue flag flying high.